Well, you're going to love this video because it's a little bit quirky. The background is a little bit abstracty, but really fun to paint. You are going to be using Misket. I misketed some of the really white feathers on the bird and also the flowers, the little specks of flowers. Really not necessary to do much else. If you want to do a couple little pieces of grass, that's fine, but I wouldn't do a whole lot other than that. You're going to be using a bunch of different brushes and colors. Your nice big wide, a number 6 and a number 2 round. You're going to be using a number 1 rigger and also your thin liner. You're going to be using salt, just regular table salt, and some saran wrap. If you don't have saran wrap, you can use a plastic bag from a food store. And of course, you'll be using your Misket. I like my little fine-tipped Misket bottle, but otherwise you can use just a really thin toothpick. You're going to use cad yellow, yellow ochre, alizarin crimson. You're going to be using burnt umber. You're going to be using burnt sienna, and you'll be using some black. In the blue family, you'll be using some cerulean blue, you'll be using some indigo blue, and of course, most of the picture is going to be used with some sap green. We're going to be using our biggest brush now, and we're going to do half of the picture first and then do the second half. You will be using your saran wrap for this part. So I mixed myself a nice big puddle of my sap green, just regular sap green, but you're going to put it on nice and wet. Really wet because we're going to drag some other colors through this, and you want to make sure it's nice and wet when you do that. So half your page, sap green, paint around your bird. Of course, you can use a smaller brush to get closer to the edges, but nice and wet. That's the key here. Really be nice and wet because I'm going to be dragging through both some indigo and some burnt umber. And if it's not nice and wet, it's just going to sit there versus, moving within the paint, which is what I want. So get it painted in half and half, nice and wet. Have your saran wrap ready. You're going to use a piece about 1.5 feet long. So, and again, if you don't have saran wrap, it's not a big deal. You can use a grocery bag. You'll just want to open it up so that it's just one ply and, you have a big enough piece to put on your whole half of painting. So you can see I'm just dragging some of that indigo blue through here and there. No rhyme or reason as to where I put it, but I just want to break up all of that plain sap green. And once I lay my saran wrap down, then you'll see how that color is going to move around. I'm just moving my paper, standing it on end so that that color can dissipate a little bit. Grabbing my piece of saran wrap. Now I'm going to lay it on, and once I lay it down, then I'm going to maneuver that saran wrap to actually form the shapes that I want to create with this saran wrap. I want to create longer, thinner shapes to make it look like branches, but that doesn't mean that you would have to do that. You can just try pot luck and see what you get. But I am pulling it out to try to get some long branchy looking shapes in my paint. You're just going to press it down and you're just going to leave it sit there. Then I'm going to flip my paper over and I'm going to go ahead and do my other side exactly the same way. I'll be painting that with my sap green, and then I'll be putting on my indigo and putting on my burnt umber. The key here also is where you kind of put the indigo on the left-hand side, you want to continue that through in that same area on the right-hand side. So the colors kind of have a purpose to them. If that's not what you want, this is your picture. You can do it wherever you want it. But I'm just kind of having it go through the same places that it did to give it a little bit of rhyme and reason to it. You'll be putting that cellophane on also. And then I went back in and I did that little section between the bird's legs. Instead of trying to catch everything all at one time. Again, I'm pulling my saran wrap to kind of give it some shapes in there. And then I'm going to let it dry. You need to let it dry for a good 15 or 20 minutes. So, find something else to do before you whip it off. It looks like I whipped it off right away, but I actually did allow that 15 or 20 minutes in between. Before you lift it off, test a little corner, make sure that you're getting these nice shapes before you go and rip the whole thing off. When you do take it off, if your picture is still a little bit damp, then go ahead and dry it really well before you do anything else. Now we're going to go and we're going to start with the chest of this pretty heron. I made my chest more pinkish toned versus tan, but again, you can use whatever colors that you want. But I used some really watered down alizarin crimson mixed with a little bit of burnt umber. I wet that whole area so that I would have some nice soft edges because they're nice feathers and they kind of blend with the rest of the bird. I didn't want any real hard edges. So I'm leaving a little bit of white on the very front of the chest, painting the rest of the chest in, going up the neck into the head area, and then taking it off the shoulder area where I'm going to add some water to kind of soften the edges. I want to have a nice soft edge to this pink color. I'm also going to be salting it. So you want to have your salt handy when you do that so that you can get some salting in there. That salting is just going to give you a little bit of a feathery look. I wet the edge with plain water because I want to have a nice soft bleed to that. And then you can go ahead and throw your salt on. You'll want to wait a little bit and let that salt work, and then we'll move on. While my salting is working and drying, I'm going to go to the left-hand side of my bird to the lower wing section where there's that nice steel gray color of wing. That steel gray color is cerulean blue mixed with a tiny little bit of black. Water it down a little bit and you'll get that pretty gray, bluish gray color. The key with these feathers is if you look at your reference picture, you'll see that those wings have a white edge, a white tip to them. So I'm only painting the inner parts of the feathers and I'm leaving a little white edge on all of those feathers. It goes about halfway up and then it's kind of watered off so that the actual whole back and top side of the bird is more of a whitish tone, not a lot of color to it. So after I get about halfway up with my gray tones, I'll start to lessen the color by adding water to it. And then at the very end, I'll just go ahead and blend it off with a little bit of water. You can throw a little bit of salt on that upper section also, just to kind of pick up a little bit of texture on those top feathers to match the chest. I'm getting my tail feathers also with that nice steel gray color so that they can be done. Be sure that you refer to your picture because there is a big section of the tail that is left white and you want to do the same. You don't want to paint that whole thing in. You want to leave some of that white because that nice white piece separates out a lot of the other feathers for you. So again, refer to your reference picture. That's the reason that I give it to you so that you can refer to that. I'm going up now too and I'm using some of that same gray color to deepen the lower part of the neck and chest. And while it's still a little bit wet with the salt on, it will go ahead and bleed up into that salt. If it's not bleeding, then just go ahead and soften the edge with a little bit of water. Down on this nice big branch that this bird is standing on, we're going to be doing dry brushing all the way across. But when you dry brush, you want to dry brush it in a rounded motion, because that's going to help the eye to see that that is a nice thick round branch. I used burnt umber and a little bit of black, and I am dry brushing the whole way across the branch with that. I'll also throw on a little bit of salt at the very end and allow that to dry really well. Okay, now we're going to go to the bird's legs, those skinny, twiggy legs. I'm wetting the upper part of the leg down to the connector, the knee connector, and I'm putting in that same pinkish tone that I used on the chest. If you want, you can use more of an orange tone if that's what you would like, and all you would have to do would be to put a little bit of yellow ochre into that pink tone. I'm wetting it above and below to have a nice soft blend to that color, and we will work on the legs again then in a little bit. When we start the background, we're going to do it a couple different ways. Your background you're going to work on for a long time. You can work on it in between painting different things. You can finish your whole bird and work on your background for the next month. It's up to you how you want to do it. It won't take you that long, but I'm telling you that it's not something that has to be done right now. We're going to draw in some of the background, and we're just going to use the shapes that we created for some of the background. Some of the shapes that I created are just bigger shapes, too big that I don't want to paint them in like that. So I'm drawing some of my background in where those bigger shapes are. Just some leaves. And then we're going to paint some of those, and we're going to paint around some of those shapes. So you're going to kind of look at your background and decide how you want to do it. You can do it both ways. You don't have to pick one. By drawing shapes in and painting in the shapes, in this situation, the leaves, I used a sap mixed with some indigo to paint in my leaves. On the other hand, if you are going to just paint around the shapes that you created, then you're going to be painting the background. You will not be painting the shapes, at least not right now. You're going to be painting around the shapes to pop those shapes out. So you can do this two different ways. This way, you are drawing leaves and painting them. The other way, on the other side, I'm actually going to pick shapes that I see that I created with the saran wrap, and I'm going to paint around them with a really dark color. In this case, I used indigo and black. You can use black and sap. You can use black and indigo, but I'm making it rather dark because I want to pop out my shapes. And then once I get some of that done, I can kind of change back and forth. Do I want to draw some things and paint them? Do I want to draw some things and paint around them like I created that shape? Or do I want to just strictly stick with all of the shapes that I created with my saran wrap and just paint around them? It's something that you will create as you go. Again, your background doesn't have to be done all at one time, because we're going to be doing this part of the background by creating those shapes, and then we're going to fill some of those shapes in and deepen them and push them deeper into the woods. we're going to be creating a deeper section. So we're going to be painting over whole sections of the background. So how you paint your background is important, but it's not the end of the story, so they say, because there's always a way that we can fix it, darken it, do whatever. So work on your background in between everything else that we're doing. And then if you have a lot of background to do when we're all done, that's fine. You can do a little bit every day or sit down and watch TV for an hour or two and finish it. It's whatever you want to do. I'm drawing in some more smaller weed type leaves on my sticks that I created with my saran wrap. So this is just another way of filling in my whole background. Now here's a little bit of a close-up so you can see exactly what I'm doing, how I drew some things in and I will paint them, and how I am picking shapes out of my saran wrap and then painting around those shapes. As I pick out those shapes, I'm picking out leaf shapes and then I'm painting in around those with the dark color, and that is pushing out those shapes to make them look more realistic. Take your time. If you have a big shape that has nothing there, no saran wrap shapes, no nothing, that's a section that you can draw in. So you want to take it a little bit at a time. Again, you have a lot of time to work on this. This does not have to be done with your bird. Your bird basically has nothing to do with the painting of the background other than colors and shapes. We want to make sure that our background is deep enough to pop our bird out. We don't want it all to blend in as one big thing. Okay, so get ready. The picture's going to change. I have completed my background now, except for one corner, and you will see how I filled in everything to make it look like there's a jungle behind this bird. I will do that upper left corner, just haven't gotten to it yet. No hurry. Okay, now I am finished. My whole background is finished except for the areas that I'm going to deepen the color. I'm going to color some individual things in, and that would be something that you will choose depending on the rest of your painting. For this nice big log now, I'm going to be painting in the branch with some burnt umber mixed with a little bit of black, nice and wet. I'm going to paint in the whole branch, and then after I get the whole branch painted in, I'm going to run some very wet black along the lower edge and let that bleed up into the wet umber. That's going to be my shadowing already on my branch. Paint it first with that nice wet umber mixed with a little bit of black. and then drag through really wet black along the lower edge of the branch and allow that to go ahead and bleed up into the branch, and it'll already be shadowed for you. You can throw a little bit of salt on there if you want to. I wouldn't get too crazy with the salting, but you can put a little bit of salt on there and that'll give you some more texture to your branch. I did my branch half and half, so I wouldn't have to try to do the whole thing all at one time so things wouldn't start to dry. So I did half of my branch, put in my shadow, my dark color, and then did my other half. Now just to add just a little bit more texture, I took an old paper towel, scrunched it up, and lightly pressed it on my branch to give it a little bit more texture. If you don't want to do that, if you like your branch as it is, it's not necessary to do that. Now I have to start with my darkest feathers, my black feathers. This is strictly black. This is where most of my misketing is, my misketed feathers. So I'm going to go ahead in and paint in over my misket. And make sure, depending on how I put my misket on, that I have nice pointed edges to my feathers going down towards the legs. So that's why I painted all of those nice points first, and then I'll go ahead in and fill that all in. Where those feathers meet my wing feathers, it looks like it's either very fine feathers, but they are very soft, so I don't want a hard edge there. So I'm wetting that one edge just so that that black paint dissipates up into that water, and it looks like those feathers are more like down feathers than a hard edged feather. But the rest of my black feathers, along the lower belly, they're going to be just plain black until I get to the white part of the tail. And then I can wet that also where the black's going to meet the white so that that's a little bit softer too. If you come down into that tail with hard edges, it's really not going to matter because the black feathers can easily just go up against that white, those white feathers. It doesn't have to be a soft edge. Continue down then to the tail feathers. Again, nice and black. You're working around the gray feathers though. Don't forget about the gray feathers. You want to leave them as gray. Just part of the tail is black. Now you want to make sure that your salt is off because there's a little coloring up on his upper shoulder, his upper wing. I used that same steel gray color, just added a little extra black to it, and I'm doing a little bit of dry brushing along the edge, and then I will actually paint in like that little half circle that looks like the design on his wing. Just refer to your picture on that one. After I do the wing, I'm going to use that same color and I'm going to do that little black section above his eye that goes towards the back of his head. Just refer to your picture, you'll see exactly where that is. Once I paint that section in, then I am going to rinse my brush and I'm going to just get plain water on my brush and I'm going to dip it into the front part of that design above the eye so that the front part of that will be lighter than the back part that goes towards the back of the head. I'm just going to put a drop of water down and let it push the paint out of the way. It'll push that paint towards the back of the head. It's just plain water. I'm going to just dab it in there and it'll go ahead and lighten that color. Now with some watered down black, I'll go ahead and put in a little bit of that additional gray tone under the eye and between the eye and the beak. Specific shapes to that. And again, just refer to your picture. You'll be able to see that. You can kind of dry brush into the beak if you'd like to, because there is some very pale dry brushing with that color. We're going to go under his chin and we're going to do, it looks like V's down his chest with that darker color in the area that we left white. If you didn't leave it white, that's fine. Just go ahead and put those darker V's on whatever color you have there. But you want to go ahead and put those in. We're going to start to be doing a lot of the little detail stuff here and there. And I'm going to go ahead and deepen and shadow below his bulged out chest, because that's going to get a little bit of a shadow both from the overhanging beak and also because of the way the neck is shaped, it causes a little bit of shadow on the underside. This is just watered down black, very watered down, and I'm putting that on where you see it in your picture, and then you can just soften the edges with plain water. Make sure that your plain water is clean, because if your plain water is dirty, it will leave those marks on your painting. Go ahead and paint in those shadows and then just soften it with your brush with clean water. Back to his underside again. This is the inside of the wing, the left wing. So I'm painting that in. It's just all black except for the little bit that's left of the white tail, but otherwise it's just painted in all black. Make sure you get it nice and dark, because the darker that is, the more it's going to pop the whiteness and the lighter colors of the bird out. Now I'm going to go back to my background. I had mentioned to you before that we're going to deepen some of the background because we want to pop that bird out. If you have a lighter background and you have a lighter bird, it's going to be hard to differentiate which is which. So I am painting some of the leaves, specific leaves, that are close to the bird with a deeper wash of sap. You could use a deeper wash of umber if you would like. You could use a deeper wash of indigo if you would like. You could mix sap and indigo. You could mix indigo and cerulean, but you want to deepen some of the leaves that are, you're picking out certain leaves, and we're deepening those because we want to get that bird to really pop out. So I'm going to deepen all the way around the bird, just not on the left-hand side. But I am going to keep some sections. I'm not going to paint some of the sections because I'm going to put a total wash on the whole section. So that upper left section, you'll see in a little bit where I put a whole wash on that. On this lower left section, I'm painting in specific things with some indigo and some sap. It's watered down a little bit, but I'm painting it enough that it's popping my bird out. You can already see how that bird is coming to the forefront and it's pushing the background back. Do a little bit at a time, because again, you don't want to lose all of your lighter colors in your background. You want to leave some of those, but you just want to make sure that you are painting what's necessary to make your bird become more visible. As I had mentioned, I'm going to put a wash of sap mixed with a little bit of black on this whole upper left section. So it's just going to pop my bird out without any effort whatsoever, because I'm just going to go over that whole section. I'm not going to lose any of the nice detail, but what I am going to lose is the lightness to that, and it's going to really make my bird become more evident. You want to make sure that you get the area below that branch nice and dark. So I used that same sap and black and painted that whole strip so that it's nice and dark underneath that branch. I'm going to put a little bit of color now on the bird's wings. Make sure that I'm nice and dark with my black, and I'm going to pull some of that black up into those white feathers now to separate that out. Even though I have misket on, I want to put some coloring over the misketed areas so that when I take that misket off, I will already have some very evident looking feathers. So where you have your misket, you want to be sure to put a little bit of coloring, even if it's just gray coloring, so that when you take the misket off, it will already form some of those nice thin feathers for you. I'm going to deepen some of my still gray feathers. If you were dark at the beginning, you might not have to do this step, but I'm a little on the lighter side, so I'm going to go ahead and deepen some of those feathers with that same color, the cerulean blue, and mixed with a little bit of black. And I'm going to go ahead and just repaint some of those in, again leaving those white edges. I don't want to lose my white edges that I have there. Now these bird legs are old wrinkled skin, so I'm going to dry brush along the edge of those skinny legs with my little tiny brush, my number 2 round, and I'm using some watered down black, and I'm dry brushing along the edge just to make it look like it's old, dead, scaly looking skin. I want those legs to look really rough, and this is the perfect way to do it. Once you get that done, you have to let that dry before we put any kind of coloring on those legs. There will be some coloring, especially along those upper legs, but you want to make sure that your dry brushing is done to make it look nice and rough. After I get done with the dry brushing on the legs, I'm going to go ahead and go down by the toe area. And what I want to do is I want to separate out those toes a little bit. So if you follow your picture, you'll see where there's some dark coloring along the toes. It's more towards the bottoms of the toes, and I want to go ahead and separate those out. Make those toes become a little bit more visible on the branch. Okay, we've not worked on our beak yet, so I mixed a little bit of our crimson color with a little bit of yellow to get a nice orangey tone, a lot of water to it, and I'm going to go ahead and paint in that beak. It's a very pale peachy tone, not dark at all. So your crimson mixed with a little bit of yellow, you're going to go ahead and paint in that beak. Once the beak is dry, then we're going to go back in and work on the eye area, and we'll also work on the beak area. So I am outlining my eye with some watered down black, and then I am going to let that dry. Looking at my picture now, while things are drying on my bird, the legs, the toes, the eye, I'm going in and I am deepening some of the leaves in my background. Some can stay lighter in tone and they look okay, but I need some of them to be darker in tone, again, to help to push out that bird. So you will see where I'm painting and deepening some of the colors so that I can get that bird to really pop out and push my background back a little bit by deepening the color. Once you have your background where you want it to be, then you can remove some of your Misket. But don't do that until you are totally happy with all of your coloring. Your Misket will just rub off, so you can go ahead and rub off the little flowers that you misketed. You can rub off any grasses that you misketed. If you want to rub off the feathers now, you can, or you can do that at a different time if you're not sure that you are finished with your bird. You have to be totally finished and happy with what you have before you take your Misket off. So I've taken all of my Misket off because I'm happy with my bird and with my background, and I'm going to work on my feathers first. I don't want those white feathers to be super white where I've misketed them close to the chest. So I want to kind of blend that color and have it be not quite so white where they connect. So first I'm separating out some of my bigger clumps of white from the Misket. I'm separating them out by I'm actually painting in separate feather lines with my black. And once I've done that, then I'm going to use that same grayish tone, possibly depending on where my misketing was. If you need to, you can put in a little bit of that pink if you used pink in your chest. And I'm going to paint in the upper part of my misketed lines closest to the chest, so that they blend in a little bit better, so that it's just not such an abrupt change of a pink chest to a white feather. I'm going now from a pink chest to a little bit of a feather that's the same color as my chest, and then that's leading into my nice white feathers. So I don't have that abrupt looking change. And all I did was paint in the areas of my misketed feathers closest to the chest. I'm using that same watered down color now to put in a little bit of the detail in the beak, separating the upper beak from the lower beak. And then a little bit darker, I will paint in the nostril, any of my little details there. I'll also make sure that I get that nice black pupil in the eye. Now for those skinny legs, I'm going to re-wet the legs, and I am going to be painting them with some yellow ochre. That is not quite a bright yellow, it's more of a golden yellow. So I'm going to be painting in the legs right over the pink parts too, with some of that yellow ochre, a nice golden color. And I'll just carry that down to the lower part of the leg, but really not paint it as dark. I'll kind of let that go ahead and blend off to the white. I will put some of that color on the feet, especially the toes. If you would like the whole leg to be that color, that's perfectly fine, and you can put that whole color on both legs. But you want to especially make sure that you get it on the toes. Touch-ups with my gray tones into some of my feathers. Any place that you feel needs shadowed a little bit darker, you can go ahead and shadow it in a little bit darker. Just do a little bit at a time though, because it's very easy to do too much. It's a fine line between too much and not enough. So do a little bit at a time. If you put it on and you don't like it, go ahead and blot it right back off right away. But don't do too much too soon. And be sure that if your edges need to be softened, that you go ahead and soften them with some water. You want to make sure that you don't have any hard lines where you do not want them. I'm going to put in my little bit of a shadow now where his neck hits his back. There's a little bit of a shadow there. So you want to go ahead and put that shadow in. That's just watered down black. And the edge on the neck is softened a little bit, or if you don't want to soften it with water, you can just dry brush it upwards to give it a little bit of a feathered look. Just a little bit, not a whole lot. But that goes to separate out that neck from his back. Make sure your nostril where it needs to be is nice and dark, and definitely make sure you get that nice black pupil in his eye. Coming down to the end, it's turning out so perfectly, just like I want it to. So now I'm going to go ahead and paint in my flowers. They can be painted in any color that you want. These little white ones, I'm kind of leaving them white, but just putting a little bit of blue here and there to kind of break up any white spots that got too big. And then I'm painting my little flowers with my alizarin crimson. If you want them to be orange, they can be red, or you can leave them white. They can be yellow, whatever color you want. I liked the pink color, so I'm going to go ahead and paint those in with my alizarin crimson. I'll paint them all in, and then while they're still wet, I'm going to get some more intense alizarin crimson on the tip of my brush and touch it in the middle of the flowers to kind of give it a little bit of a center. They're still wet, so once that more intense color hits that, it'll kind of soften itself to be a soft, darker center to the flower. Anything else that you miscitted in the background, if you miscitted any weeds or anything, you want to go ahead and paint those in. You can use a lighter green, darker green, whichever. You'll still be able to visibly see them because they were nice and white. So you'll be able to see where you had any separate grasses. After you're done with all of those grasses, we are going to do the final work on the feathers, the chest feathers, and the very last thing that we'll be doing is we will be adding a couple additional little white feathers with our Chinese white. Okay, your Chinese white, again, I always keep my white in a totally separate container because it gets contaminated very easily. So I'm going to wet that down, and with my very fine liner, I'm just going to paint in some extra little fine feathers, and also a couple little feathers along the back. And if you forgot any along the top of the head, you can go ahead and add some of those. But this Chinese white, it goes on very white, but it'll dry like ghostly, that you can hardly see it. So you want to make sure that when you are using Chinese white, that you put it on, I don't want to say thick because it's hard to put it on thick, but you want to make sure that it's very watery but also very intense, because it will dry so totally light you won't even see it. And again, don't overdo. This is for just some nice fine little extra feathers along the back, along the top of the head, that you may have missed. Chinese white with your very, very fine brush. couple little extras along the shoulder blade. Now I want to put the shadow on the branch where his toes are. His toes are creating a shadow on the branch. So underneath the toes, and again, you want to round those shadows to be the same as the branch. Those shadows, if they are arched in a circular motion, that'll help to show the shape of the branch as well as how the toes are overhanging. Just gives a little bit more realism to your picture. Make sure you get those shadows in nice and dark because those toes are right up against the branch, so they're creating a nice dark hard shadow. Once you're done with the shadows, then you are done with this picture. This was a great picture to get us back into painting again from our little bit of a winter break. Background is kind of mosaic. I love it. I hope you enjoyed this picture. Again, you can take however long you need on that background. Take your time. You put a lot of time and effort to it, and you want it to stay nice and crisp and clean. And as always, happy painting.